Is there a microphone? Do we need that? I'm not.
Apparently wasn't switched on this morning, so we're okay with that.
Okay. Alright, we'll skip the gyromaticus. We'll continue on where we left off this morning. So the last thing that we talked about was Prabhupada's willingness to adjust the deity worship schedule in Iran because of the circumstances there. Then he was willing to cut down the number of offerings and artis that were made to the they weren't installed at that time, but if they were going to install Radha Krishna, then he was willing to go with the reduced program there. But that was an exception, and of course, preaching in the Muslim countries is definitely an exceptional circumstance. In general, we shouldn't take that that's an endorsement so that anywhere we are in the temple, if we want, we can change the schedule for Radha Krishna worship. Prabhupada's standard for worshipping Radha and Krishna was quite high, and that has to be maintained. Anyway, so another aspect then of deity, not exactly deity worship, but sometimes devotees used to wear deity paraphernalia. It was a fashion, at least in the 70s, that the Brahman threads that used to come from Krishna, a lot of the pujaris and devotees, they would get them and wrap them around their wrists, like a bracelet, and then they would wear them. And other different kinds of paraphernalia, they'd use. So one instance of that came up in Vrindavan in April of 1976. This was on the 6th of April. Prabhupada was out on a morning walk. So during his walk at the Ranga Gardens today, Prabhupada answered questions about the tendency of devotees to wear extra paraphernalia, like Radhakund clay beads, tulsi beads interspersed with silver or gold beads, and items like the used sacred threads from the deities, which they wrap around their wrists. Prabhupada said that the deity threads should not be worn. It is becoming a fad throughout the society, and the practice should be stopped. He quoted another of his very apt Bengali sayings: "A crow eats stool, but young crows eat more stool." He said there is always a tendency at the slightest opportunity to revert back to being hippies. We should not allow it, he said. If that happens, whatever prestige that we have so far will all be finished. So he liked to keep things simple. And of course, just a note on these tulsi and gold beads, necklaces. Prabhupada was once given one of those, and so he wore it. As soon as he put it on, instantly all over the society, all the sannyasis and anybody with a bit of money, they were buying these gold necklaces with tulsi beads on them. As soon as Prabhupada saw that, he took his off. Because he said, it's just becoming a fashion. And then he said, now if I wear it, they'll wear it. So if I don't wear it, then they shouldn't wear it either. So he liked things, just keep it simple, that's all. Another thing about murtis, not just necessarily installed deities. I've seen also, since Prabhupada's disappearance, a bit of a fashion, putting murtis of Krishna or the avatars out in ornamental gardens. In some places they've built these, huge 15 feet tall murtis of Lord Chaitanya. They have one in Vancouver, and I saw in New Vrindavan they have, I think, Gaunatad there, huge, in the middle of a lake. So one comment on that at least, Prabhupada made when we were in Nellore on January the 4th. We just arrived there. And we got to Nellore because these two sisters were supposed to be giving some land to build a temple on. As it turned out, the so-called gift had many riders on it. When the devotees signed the documents for the deed of gift, they didn't read the small print. That was a classic. And when Prabhupada got there, we could understand that there was something wrong, because the reception that we got from the two sisters was very kind of muted. You know, you would have thought that they were being really, really happy to have Srila Prabhupada coming to stay in their house. He'd come there to do the foundation stone ceremony, and we were supposed to build a temple there. But when we got there, they were really very cool. I mean, I don't mean cool, as in modern cool. They were just cool, as in, you know, not very warm. So we thought it was a little funny, you know, something's going on here. And then, of course, the first day we noticed they had chickens in the yard, so they were meat eaters. So it didn't seem like their usual profile for somebody that was, you know, aspiring to help, you know, the Vaishnava movement. So we had a discussion about this the next day on January the 4th. So Prabhupada gave his appraisal of the mentality of our hosts. Having seen the figurine of Krishna in the garden and the surrounding tulsi trees, I had thought perhaps that the two sisters did have some genuine interest in Krishna, but Prabhupada saw it differently. Now when we came in, we had to walk in through this driveway, and then at the end, just in front of their house, there was a little turning circle. So in the middle of that, there was an ornamental garden, and they had a statue of Krishna in the middle of the garden. So, you know, I was thinking, oh, that's nice, at least they've got something about Krishna. And all the borders of the gardens, they had tulsi trees planted everywhere. So Prabhupada saw it differently. He said, I have seen in Calcutta one statue of Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee. So in the morning, on the day of the birth anniversary, the municipal sweepers come with their brush, so they rub it to cleanse the solidly stuck-up crow's stool with water. Then in the evening, big men come. They gather and offer him a garland, one after another, just like they were offering me this morning. So in the morning it is brushed with a sweeper's street brush, and in the evening it is offered a garland. I have seen it. So here also I have seen that she's keeping Krishna's murti outside. It is an aparad. So Prabhupada didn't like it at all. Unfortunately, as I say, some of our temples think it's nice to have some gigantic statue, but it's not nice at all. I told them, but they still haven't done anything about it. But anyway, that was Prabhupada's opinion. It's an aparad. Now, another form of deity, of course, that Prabhupada said that could be worshipped is his books. He actually, there were letters that Prabhupada said that, yes, you can put my books on the altar because they're not different from Krishna. So again, we were in Nellore. This was January the 3rd, we just arrived there. Prabhupada was enlivened to hear the enthusiastic report, the book distribution report from Rameshwaram, especially since he had already heard of the success of the Christmas marathon. In the past, he had deliberately promoted a competition between the temples in book distribution, and he teased Tamal Krishna Maharaj as he dictated his reply to Rameshwaram. Because Tamal Krishna Maharaj had just come on as the secretary 2 days before, and at that time he was running the Radha Damodar Traveling Sankirtan Party in America. So they had over 100 brahmacharis traversing all over America, and I think they had 6 or 7 Greyhound buses and at least 1 dozen of these maxi vans. And they were, you know, selling phenomenal amounts of Prabhupada's books, putting in about $50,000 a month to the BBT. So there was a big competition between them and Los Angeles, where Rameshwaram was situated, and he was the BBT trustee there as well. So now Tamal Krishna Maharaj, he had brought Rameshwaram's report from the Christmas marathon to Srila Prabhupada by hand. So he's Prabhupada's secretary, he's taking the reply, and so Prabhupada was, you know, teasing him. So he said, regarding the suggestion for book selling, the point is that the temples must pay the cost of printing, and then they may sell for whatever price they like. The transcendental competition is nice. If Jayatirtha Prabhu, who was the GBC in LA, defeats Tamal Krishna Maharaj, then Tamal will have heart failure. Tamal's writing this down, right? Go on selling books. My Guru Maharaj was very much anxious about the selling of books and preaching. So you were all pleasing him by this bombastic flood of books all over the world. Thank you. He also added a note of approval and precaution on the new Bhagavatam printing. So they just upgraded the standard of the printing of Prabhupada's Bhagavatam. So Tamal also brought with him a copy of the 6th canto, part 1. It had just been published. And for Prabhupada's copies, they put this gold gilt edge on the pages, and they had this new end sheet in the books depicting Sukadeva Goswami's speaking the Bhagavatam to Pariksit Maharaj with all the sages. So that 6th canto, part 1, was the first Bhagavatam that they put those end sheets in. And then also changed the design on the actual hardcover as well. So overall, Prabhupada liked it very much, but he gave this precautionary note. He said, the new 6th canto Bhagavatams are very nice. Yes, actually they are worshipable deities. Be careful that our books do not appear like Bible printing. Sometimes the Christians also put gold gilding on their books, but people are adverse to purchasing Bibles. Neither our books should be given free. There must be some remuneration, otherwise it will be like Bible selling. So he wanted his books to be appreciated, not that just, you give them here and there, like you go in a hotel and open the drawer and there's, Gideon's Bible or whatever. He wanted people to actually take his books very seriously. So another aspect of deities, Srila Maharaj sent a letter to Prabhupada, which he again replied whilst he was in Nellore. And he explained how he had over 100 preaching engagements alone in Texas colleges during January and February. So he was touring all the universities, and they were giving lectures, sometimes 2 or 3 a day. And in 2 months he had 100 preaching engagements. That's like 3 a day, every single day. So he asked Prabhupada if he could carry small Gaunitai deities onto the campuses. Prabhupada did not approve of his taking deities into the classrooms, lest the students think as fanatics, and instead he recommended a large picture of Gaunitai. And he also gave that same instruction to Adikeshava Maharaj later on when he wrote. He wanted to know if he should travel with Gaunitai as a sannyasi, and Prabhupada said, no, it's not necessary. Sannyasis are not required to do that. If you're going from temple to temple, you'll see the deities there, but otherwise it's not really necessary. So another kind of deity, this was a little incident that I was involved in. So we were at Ahmedabad. This was on December the 30th in 1975. And Prabhupada had just done a 5-day pandal at a city called Sanand, small town, about 20,000 people. And we came back into Ahmedabad and we were due to fly back down to Bombay. So we were sitting in the car. We ended up at a small temple of Lord Shiva. After offering respects to the deity, Prabhupada gave a short lecture in Hindi. So what had happened, we came into Ahmedabad, and then the devotees arranged for a little procession through the streets of this neighbourhood. And they'd arranged for a horse and cart, like a carriage, for Prabhupada to sit on. And they took him around, and we ended up at this Shiva temple. Prabhupada went in, he offered his obeisances to Lord Shiva, as, a Vaishnava. And then he gave a little talk. Then it was on to a life member's house for lunch and a short rest. Yasamati Nandan then took Srila Prabhupada to see a house that he was thinking of renting for a centre. After inspecting it, Prabhupada sat in the back seat of the car next to me, ready to leave for the airport. Just then, a young boy of about 10 came up to the window next to me. He peered in, and he saw the beautiful button that I was wearing on my curry waistcoat, badge. It was a photo of the deities of Jagannath, Balaram and Subhadra in Melbourne. The boy's eyes lit up. Without saying a word, he repeatedly pointed first at the badge and then at himself, like this, with his eyebrows going up and down and a big smile on his face, as if to say, Give it to me, give it to me. I did my best to ignore it because I was rather attached to the badge and I'd worn it for a long time. When Prabhupada looked over to see what was going on, I half suspected that he might tell me to give it to the boy, and I was hoping not. Suddenly Prabhupada leaned forward with his eyes wide, and he put up both his hands with his fingers spread wide. 10 rupees, he told the boy with mock seriousness. 10 rupees, like this. So the boy just laughed. Our solicitor's young visitor was only momentarily taken aback. Shaking his head from side to side, he continued to point. Prabhupada laughed and sat back. All right, give him it. Resigned, I dutifully handed over the badge, and the boy skipped merrily away. His prize was the lotus feet of the Lord of the universe. Mine was a little more detachment and surrender to the lotus feet of the Lord's servant, Srila Prabhupada. So, some aspects of worshipping deities in people's homes. Because sometimes Prabhupada did programs in India, he would be invited to a rich man's house, and then invariably the people that invited him, they would have their own family deities. It's still a tradition, and it's kept up there. So one example of that was when we went to New Delhi on March the 24th. This was just after the 1976 Gaur Purnima festival. So Prabhupada came over from Mayapur. Then we did a couple of small programs. Jai Shri Shri Gunatai Ki Jai. He did a few small programs for about a week, and then we went on to Vrindavan for that leg of the festival. So the first program that we did was that we went to Chanakapuri, to the house of Mr. Lakshman Agarwal. He was the owner of the Lakshman Sylvania light bulb company. They had a big factory, and in those days, you know, their light bulbs were everywhere, you know, tube lights and whatever. So when we moved into their house for a few days, he'd set up like a small pandal just outside his house, and we saw that the Agarwals are devotees of Lord Krishna and have a beautiful set of 30-inch marble Radha Krishna deities. They keep the deities on the first floor of their home and worship them daily in simple fashion. So that was the Agarwals, their deities. Then, and very often these people, they would hire some brahmana who would, you know, live in the house, and they'd do all the pujas every day. And then any important ceremony, then they would first of all do all the pujas to the family deity before they embarked on any new endeavour, or if there was, you know, a wedding or, you know, whatever. So from Delhi then we went to Modi Nagar. Modi Nagar is a small town on the outskirts of Delhi, and it's named after the Modi family. So the Modis, they became very rich from industrial enterprise. So on March the 29th, early in the morning, Prabhupada went by car to Modi Nagar, a small industrial town founded by the Modi family. They are well known throughout India for cloth and other manufactured goods. It has 6 colleges and a huge factory complex. A notable feature is a grand Lakshmi Narayan temple compound, built from red sandstone with 3 large steeple-like towers set back from the road across a broad open courtyard. Prabhupada was met in front of the temple by the widowed Mrs. Modi and a large crowd of our devotees. After paying his respects to the deities and taking a tour of the marble complex, Prabhupada gave a short talk in a back room before going to the Modi mansion where he will reside until tomorrow. So they didn't just have deities in their house, they actually built a really big temple and had that, you know, full-scale worship going on there. So on March the 30th, 1976, that was the next day, we'd done a one-night program in Modi Nagar. Then we set off to Aligarh. Now Aligarh was about 1 hour from Vrindavan. So in Aligarh, again, we stayed at another big rich man's house, Mr. Surendra Kumar Saigal. They owned a company called the Tiger Lock Company. So they made all these brass locks, again, all over India, big enterprise. So as soon as Prabhupada arrived, Surendra Kumar's wife invited him to see a beautiful deity of Krishna. Stepping inside a small room off the back veranda, Mrs. Saigal revealed her worshipable Lord. He is 3 feet high and carved from white marble, complete with crown, chowder, dhoti and a brass flute. Her worship of the Lord is not very elaborate, with offerings consisting primarily of incense and flowers, but Prabhupada encouraged her devotion and suggested that she obtain a deity of Radharani. Why keep Krishna alone, he said. So the other 2 families, the Agarwals and then the Modis, they had Radha Krishna, or Mrs. Modi actually was worshipping Lakshmi Narayan. But the Agarwals, Saigals, they only had Krishna. So that was Prabhupada's first comment. Very nice, but why get Radharani, don't keep Krishna alone. So then later in the day, before we had the program, a visitor asked a question regarding the Arya Samaj, an organization that claims religiosity but rejects the idea that God can appear in the form of a deity. Its followers uphold the impersonal concept of the Absolute. Prabhupada replied that to worship Nirguna Brahman, the formless aspect of God, is alright, but Sri Krishna himself is the deity. He is not stone or wood. He mercifully appears in this form to enable us to render personal service to him. So their argument was, well, how can you worship a lump of stone as God? Prabhupada's reply was, this is not a lump of stone, this is God. Because everything, of course, is God's energy. If he wants to appear in, through the agency of his own energy, then who can stop him? So that's the difference, between the vision of a devotee and the vision of a karma. So then, later on, not so long after this, on April the 19th, Prabhupada had flown to Melbourne in Australia, and that was the first leg of what was to be the last world tour that he did. Because he came back one more time to London in '77 to the Manor, but that wasn't really a tour, it was a quick trip and then back again. So when we got to Melbourne then, we'd been travelling a long time. We set off on the 18th, we got in 18th morning at 7 o'clock. We had a stopover in Singapore, which it was supposed to be, I think, about 4 hours, and then it turned out to be about 7 hours. There was delays there. We got stuck on the plane. They had some technical difficulties, so we had to sit for another 3 hours. So it was quite a difficult trip. Then we flew in from Singapore to Sydney. We had an hour's transit in Sydney. Then we had to fly down to Melbourne, another hour's trip. So by the time that Prabhupada arrived in Melbourne and got to the temple, of course, as soon as we arrived in Melbourne, also the devotees had arranged for a press conference for Prabhupada at the airport, so he had to go through that. So that was another 45 minutes, and then another 45 minutes to drive to the temple. It was quite a trip. It was a long haul. So upon arrival, although it was 2:30 p.m., this was the next day, Prabhupada went straight into the temple room and had a special darshan of the deities. I worked it out, we've been travelling for nearly 22 hours, including all the transits on the way there. So Prabhupada still, he went straight into the temple room, even though it was 2:30. The devotees had opened the curtains, although the deities were normally asleep. And Prabhupada had a special darshan of the deities, Sri Sri Gaunitai, Sri Sri Radha Vallabha, and Sri Jagannath Baladeva and Subhadra. He then gave a 10-minute lecture to the packed devotee audience. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chakshram Militam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. So now the time is too late. I wish to take my bath. So I'll not speak very much now. But this much I must express. My obligation that you are worshipping the deity so nicely. That is my great happiness, and that is your happiness also. The more gloriously you worship the deity, decorate the deity as gorgeously as possible, the more gorgeous you will be. That is the secret. The materialistic, they're trying to dress themselves very gorgeously, and gradually their dress is being taken away by Maya, and voluntarily they are becoming hippies. But the secret of success is that everything belongs to Krishna. Simply you have to collect them and offer them for the pleasure of Krishna. He stressed that the secret of success is to offer everything to Krishna. He told the eager young devotees that he has given a glimpse of the Krishna consciousness movement in the Western countries, and now it is up to them to take it up. After leaving the temple room, he went up to his rooms. Still thinking of the deities, he told us that the worship here is as good a standard as in New York and Los Angeles, even though there isn't as much expenditure. Last May, when Prabhupada officially opened this temple and installed the large 4 feet high brass deities of Sri Sri Gauratai, he referred to the temple as Melbourne Mahaprabhu Mandir. Now, after seeing the beautiful deities, his thoughts turned once again to the merciful nature of the two divine brothers, and he commented that Gauratai worship is so nice that they can be worshipped merely by performing kirtan. So at that point, those deities were the biggest brass Gauratai deities in the movement. I think originally they'd been ordered for some temple in America and then they didn't get them. And Madhavisa Swami, who had been the GBC at that time, he had brought them to Melbourne. And I remember when they arrived in the boxes, we actually had to get a little crane to lift them out of the boxes and put them in, into the deity room there. And Prabhupada himself did the installation ceremony. That was in May of 1975. So this was like a year later. Prabhupada came back and was very pleased, with the standard of worship. And I remember, it's just come to me actually. He had also installed Radha Vallabha in Melbourne in 1973, 2 years before. And then later on, the devotees sent him a big photograph, like about 24 inches by 18 inches or something, of Radha Vallabha. And they had Radharani dressed with this kind of white lace over her head, so she looked like a bridesmaid. And Prabhupada really loved it. He put it up on his wall in Vrindavan, in his room on the roof. And he said that, Radha and Krishna, they looked like a wedding couple. That Radha Vallabha, he looked like a bridegroom, and Radharani looked like a bridesmaid. So it was nice. So April the 23rd then, in Melbourne, a couple of days later, Prabhupada was giving his talks in the evenings. He decided not to speak in the morning, and he had the devotees advertise, because they were already advertising, and there was to be a program every evening. And then Prabhupada said, after the program, then they should have a big feast for all the guests. So they were getting a good crowd every evening. So on his way out of the temple, yesterday evening on the 22nd, one of the visitors had given Srila Prabhupada a gold chain as dakshina, along with a letter in which she suggested that Prabhupada might either offer it to the deities or keep it for himself. He decided to give it to the pujaris for Srimati Radharani. So this evening, as he slowly made his way out of the temple room through the crowded lines of devotees, he spotted the donor in the throng. He called her forward to inform him of his decision. The girl was so overwhelmed by being personally spoken to by Srila Prabhupada that she couldn't understand what he was saying. So Pushta Krishna Swami had to explain it to her. She was deeply satisfied and honoured to get personal recognition from Srila Prabhupada. So he gave that chain to the pujaris for Radharani. So then the next, I think the same day, there was a meeting with a couple of visitors. They were Mormons. Of course, the Mormons, everybody knows, they send out their young men. I think when they're about 18, they send them out for 2 years, and they go to different parts of the world, and they spend 2 years preaching. So you always see them in twos. They're actually very intelligent. They never let anybody go out on their own. They're always in twos, so that they support each other and they don't fall into Maya. If they ever get out of Maya. But just, to uphold their, standards. So they're always, you see them everywhere. So somehow or another, these two Mormon boys, they had met the devotees, and they had, told them, our spiritual master's coming, why don't you come and meet him? So they said, sure, why not? Actually, the Mormons are quite open, you can speak to them, they're not like really, fanatical Bible bashers, You can actually have a discussion with them. Although their own philosophy is complete nonsense. But, they're also myriads. When you get down to it, I went to the Mormon Center in Utah. I was walking around. That time I was in Saffron. So we were walking around and this old man came up and he introduced himself. He was the secretary of the prophet. They have like we have our gurus. So they have one prophet. It's like the Pope, for the Mormons. So this guy was his personal secretary. So he'd seen 2 or 3, Hari Krishnas walking around. So he thought he would come over and talk to us. So I didn't let on that I knew what their philosophy was. So I just let him start, speaking. And he was just talking, chit-chatting in general, and then gradually started, explaining about what they were doing, and, the whole thing about genealogy and this and that. And then finally we got to talking about God. And we got down to the essence of it. And I knew that their philosophy was that what man is now, God once was. And what God is now, man can become. That's actually their philosophy. In other words, everybody can become God. And that God was once an ordinary man, and then he became God. And then everybody who's an ordinary man can become God in the future. And their vision of, the future, stage of perfection is that you go out and preach first, when you're 18 or 20. Then you retire from preaching, and then you take up the real perfection of life, which is household life. And you have a family, and then when you die, that whole family, they all stay with you, and you go to heaven. And if you become perfect, then you get your own universe, right? And you have Jesus Christ as your son, because he's the Son of God. So that means you become God, and you have Jesus as your son. And this is their whole philosophy. I mean, it's very bizarre. Anyway, I had this long conversation with this guy, but they won't tell you that right at the very beginning, but I knew what it was, so I led him along. And then after half an hour, he had to admit that that's actually what their goal was. And then I got him, because I explained, I said then, that means that you say that God can suffer. Because everybody in this material world is suffering. Now if you aim is to become God, how is it that you can suffer? God doesn't suffer, he's supreme. So if you're supreme, where's the question of suffering? Suffering means it's imposed on you. You don't want it, but you have to put up with it. So I said, how can God suffer? He'd never even heard the question before. And that was it, he was gone. Oh, well, I'm sorry now, I have to run out of time. He got all tangled up. He couldn't answer, For us, it was a simple question, obvious question. But they built their whole religion on this philosophy, and nobody questions it. They don't even think. Anyway, that's an aside. So these 2 young men, they came to see Prabhupada. And so Prabhupada got in a little bit of debate with them. And they started talking about the idols in the temple. So they quoted a verse from the Bible that states that one should not worship idols. That was it. Prabhupada was admonishing them for, not following the commandment, thou shalt not kill. Right, because they were meat eaters. And this was something, when Prabhupada spoke with Christians, you'll see that he never allowed them to get beyond this one point. Thou shalt not kill. And why are you opening up big slaughterhouses and killing all the animals? And unless they could understand that simple point, that it's wrong to kill other living beings, you will see Prabhupada never went any further with any discussions, whether it was with a big cardinal or whether it was just some ordinary, Christian. But he would always nail them on that one point and wouldn't budge off it. So again, with these moments, he was talking about this. You say thou shalt not kill, but you're killing. Why? So they got a bit agitated. So, because Prabhupada had quoted, thou shalt not kill as one of the commandments. One of them attempted to change the subject by quoting a verse from the Bible that states that one should not worship idols. They seemed to feel that Prabhupada was unfairly admonishing them for not following one commandment, yet he was also not following the commandments. Prabhupada told them that we don't worship idols, we worship God. Pointing to a book that they had given him, they'd given him a Book of Mormon. So on that Book of Mormon on the front, on the Mormon churches, they have this statue of an angel blowing a trumpet. This is the angel Moroni. So Prabhupada pointed to the front cover of the book, which had a picture of a temple topped with a statue of an angel called Moroni. And Prabhupada said that they were also giving respect to a statue, but the crows are coming and passing stool on it. Even if one considers the deities in our temples to be mere statues, meant to honour a great person, Prabhupada asked them, what was good sense? To keep the statue indoors, or to place them outside where the crows and birds can come and pass stool on them? One of the Mormons agreed that it was better to keep such statues indoors, but the other one became a little acrimonious. Well, okay, here's some of my good sense. You've got statues in your temple, and I noticed there were a lot of flies in there on the other night, crawling all over them and doing their whatever they do. In other words, the flies are passing stool on the deities. So, do you mean that a fly coming and a crow passing stool is the same thing? Prabhupada asked, raising his eyebrows. Very good sense. It is very good reason that because the flies cannot be checked, and then the crows, then they should be allowed to pass stool. At least you can stop the crows. We have done that. We don't allow the crows to come. At one point, perhaps as a result of his... okay, so then that was the Mormons, and then there was another conversation in the temple. Prabhupada was giving his lecture, and then somebody again asked some question, Christian kind of thing. So at one point, perhaps as a result of his earlier conversation with the Mormons, Prabhupada took the opportunity to explain why we worship deities. Here it is said, Mayam tatamidam sarvam jagadavyakta murtina. And that expansion, that impersonal expansion, not manifested. You cannot see God in person in this expansion. Therefore, sometimes we foolishly say, can you show me God? God is there. You have to make your eyes to see. Just like God is here in the temple. But somebody is thinking, oh, that is not God. This is a statue or an idol. They are worshipping the idol. Well, supposing it is idol. But if God is everywhere, why is he not in the idol? God has the power. And actually, this is not an idol. This is God's energy. The same example. The sunshine is everywhere. So originally, sunshine is the cause of everything. Similarly, God's effulgence is the cause of all material things also. So, more on the deity worship then in Melbourne. April the 25th, 1976, a couple of days later. So in his final meeting this afternoon, Prabhupada granted the entire assembly of devotees darshan in his room. He did the same thing last year and happily fulfilled the devotees' request to keep up the tradition. It was a light-hearted, happy occasion, and each devotee had the opportunity to come forward and present some dakshina. Srila Prabhupada encouraged them to go on working together, to maintain their enthusiasm by preaching and kirtan, and to go on worshipping the deities very gorgeously. He told the devotees that we have to follow the spiritual master's instructions, perfect ourselves first, and then others. Putting emphasis on the need to preach, he said we all have to become guru, and even if there is a split, still the standard should not change. It was just like him and his godbrothers, he said. There is no disagreement so far as the standards of worship is concerned. Prabhupada also stressed that the highest service is to distribute his books. So that was in reference to a few devotees that were there, that were part of this French group that had split off from ISKCON a couple of years before, under Siddhaswarup Ananda and this other sannyasi, Tusta Krsna. Tusta Krsna was in New Zealand and he had come to Melbourne to see Srila Prabhupada, and he had had a few talks with Prabhupada during that visit. And so then Prabhupada was emphasizing, that, alright, you might disagree on certain things, but just like me and my godbrothers, we don't work together necessarily, but we all have an agreement about the standard of worship that has to be kept the same. So he told Tusa Krishna, I mentioned the other night, how they objected, they didn't like, living in the temple because it was a big obligation, the deities are there and you got to get up in the morning and make all the offerings and the artis and stuff. So now Prabhupada started telling them, now you open up the temple and you install deities. You wanted that. So again, that's a point of unity. Keep the same standards. So the next day then, we were in Auckland in New Zealand. Tusa Krishna had also flown over with us. And the temple president in Auckland was Yasamati Nandan Das, a tall, lean brahmachari from Australia. So he remained behind for a few minutes to ask if Gaunitai and Jagannath deities could be formally installed. So at that point they had Radha Giridhari, very beautiful deities. Giridhari is one of those old style Indian deities with a very big head, like in proportion to the rest of his body. You sometimes see these very old deities, and they have these. Krishna has a very large head, so Giridhari is just like that. I don't know how old those deities are. We don't know what the origins of them were. But Prabhupada had installed them in 1972. So now the devotees there in Auckland, they wanted to have Rathayatra, so they were thinking of having bigger Jagannath deities, and they wanted to install Gaunitai also. So Yasamati Nandan, Prabhupada had arrived, and there was a long, like a darshan in his room, and then at the end, Yasamati Nandan asked, now can we have Gaunitai and Jagannath deities? And he wanted Prabhupada to install them whilst he was there, because we were only there a day and a half, so it was a bit of a surprise. Prabhupada looked at him quizzically and he asked, why? Right, so I wasn't expecting Prabhupada to ask, why do you want the deities? He just thought, Prabhupada would naturally say, yes, very good. But he didn't. Obviously not expecting that Prabhupada would ask him why, Yasamati Nandan appeared to be a little flustered. He said that since this is Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement, it would be nice to worship Gaunitai. He also said that the Jagannath deities they presently worship are so small that they can hardly be seen. They were about 2 inches high. I remember because they were the Jagannath deities that we had in Sydney when I first joined the temple. And whenever we had a kirtan, of course, we would bounce on the floor and the deities would fall over because they were so small. Or if you put flowers around them, you just couldn't see them. So anyway, they were sent to Auckland and they had them on their altar there. So, he was saying we can't see them. Would it be alright if they installed larger deities, he said, and dropped the little deities into the sea? Yasamati Nandan's question and tone of voice was somewhat ambiguous. It wasn't clear whether he felt that the yatra needed the deities, and he was therefore asking for Prabhupada's formal approval, or whether he wanted Prabhupada to decide if they really needed them or not. Prabhupada became irritated, and he turned to the sannyasis present. He does not understand the value of the deity, he said. Yasamati Nandan became confused, and he so asked, well, should they just continue to worship the small ones and just bring the larger ones out for the Rathayatra? Now Prabhupada became annoyed. Just see, he said, he thinks they are dolls. Looking slightly disgusted, he shook his head. But despite his vexation, he concluded the conversation by saying that he would think about it some more. So then the next morning, we had gone for a morning walk. Prabhupada came back. So when Prabhupada greeted the deities, he saw that provisions had already been made on the altar for the 2 new sets of deities. 3 simple wooden dome-shaped canopies perched on slender polished wood columns, standing side by side with the beautiful forms of Sri Sri Radha Giridhari beneath the centre one. Under the right side dome, there was an empty base ready to receive Sri Sri Gaunitai, and on the opposite side the tiny forms of Lord Jagannath and his brother and sister stood before a larger base that had been made for the bigger deities. After Pushta Krishna Swami informed Prabhupada that the devotees had already purchased the deities and had made provisions for their worship, Srila Prabhupada decided that the installation ceremony could take place. However, it was too short notice to combine the installation with the initiations that were already scheduled for that morning. And so there will be a second fire yajna tomorrow morning. So that we were there 2 nights and 2 mornings, and Prabhupada was leaving early the next morning. So he did an initiation that first morning, and then the next morning, because of the last minute decision, then he installed the deities. So the same day, Tusta Krishna Swami informed Srila Prabhupada that they have decided to build a temple on their farm and install deities. Prabhupada was pleased to hear this. He told him that he should build hundreds of such temples all around the country and revolutionize the entire civilization. So it was interesting, because I mentioned before that Tusta Krishna had come to Melbourne and he had asked Prabhupada if he could get this Gayatri Mantra tape. I think I told you that, yeah. So Prabhupada had refused because they didn't have deities. And then, when Prabhupada had praised the deity worship in Melbourne, and then he made that comment at the end when he was having that final darshan, that, even if there's some splitting, it doesn't matter, we all agree on this standard of deity worship. So Tusta Krishna decided, alright, we'll build a temple. And then that way, have his people initiated and get his Gayatri Mantra tape, and they'll install deities. So Prabhupada was happy about that. Actually, another side point on that was that when Prabhupada first arrived in Melbourne, Tusta Krishna had flown in. He told Prabhupada about this farm that they had. Now in New Zealand, it was an awkward situation at that time for the ISKCON devotees, because we only had about 10 or 12 devotees in our temple. Tusta Krishna was the one who had actually gone to New Zealand and started Krishna consciousness in that country. He was the one who had taken Radha Giridhari. He brought them from India and he had taken them to Auckland, and then Prabhupada had installed them in 1972. So he was, he was the leading devotee there. Then in late 73, he split away with his, following. So it left just practically initially our temple got closed down for a couple of days. They just abandoned the deities. He was actually going to pack them up in a box and send them to Australia, but then he didn't do it. So him and practically all the devotees, they were all his followers, so they just left ISKCON. And then there was just 1 or 2 devotees left. And for a couple of days the deities weren't even dressed or fed or anything until we could send over, some more devotees. So it was a struggle for a few years. Our devotees, ISKCON devotees, there was only just like 8 or 10 of them at any one time. And they had the, deities to look after every day, and they were trying to do a little preaching. Meantime, Tusta Krishna bought this big farm, and he had a community of like 80 or 100 devotees there. And when they used to go and chant on Queen Street, which is the main street in Auckland, on a Saturday night, there'd be 4 or 5 of our devotees out chanting, and on the other side of the road, Tusta Krishna would be out there with 120. And they'd be all dancing and chanting down the road. So it was a bit lopsided for a while. It was a real struggle. And so when Tusta Krishna had come to see Prabhupada in 76 in Melbourne, he invited, what shall we do? We're just about to have the arati. Maybe we could have a silent arati, if you want, and I can just keep on going for another half hour or so.
That's what she's doing now.
Yeah, just have a silent arati. You can open the curtains, but just do it silently. So he invited Prabhupada, Jai Shri Shri Kadanitai, Michael Shasi King. So, anyway, he invited Prabhupada to come to his farm. So Prabhupada said, oh yes, very nice. So the next thing we heard, his men in New Zealand were running around to our temple and telling them, Prabhupada's not coming to see you to the ISKCON temple this time, he's coming to our farm. In other words, this proves that we're bona fide and you're not, right? So then that news came back to Melbourne, and as soon as Prabhupada heard that, he said, all right, that's it, I'm not going. He said, I'll go to our ISKCON temple, let them come to us. So Prabhupada always referred to, their group as them. And he always referred to ISKCON as us, like this. So anyway, now Tushta Krishna was informing Prabhupada that he decided to build a temple and install deities, so Prabhupada was very happy with that. So then the next morning, which was April the 28th, Prabhupada was due to leave in mid-morning, but before that he had this installation ceremony of the deities. So Prabhupada watched benignly as Guru Kripa Swami bathed the transcendental forms of the Lord, chanting the disciplic pranam mantras and performing the fire ceremony. There were some minor glitches. When the deities were bathed, some of the paint on Lord Jagannath's face began to run, and when the altar curtains opened for the deities' first darshan, Gauratai were not wearing crowns. Prabhupada immediately had the curtains closed and reopened when they were properly dressed. He didn't complain too strongly though. It was evident that the devotees were doing their best, and Prabhupada didn't want to squelch their enthusiasm. Prabhupada himself performed the first arati while the devotees held a jubilant kirtan. After returning upstairs and taking breakfast prasadam, he held the last small meeting with Tushta Krishna Swami, Yasamati Nandan Das, and Guru Kripa Maharaj. Guru Kripa was the Jiju singer, before leaving for Fiji. As the three of them sat before him, he turned to Yasamati Nandan and said, "So, you stay here and take care of these people. There are some good prospects amongst them." He also told him that now, since they had larger Jagannath deities, they must hold Rathayatra. So that was a condition. All right, now you've got your big deities, but you have to have Rathayatra for them. And his final instruction to Tushta Krishna Swami was that he should build a temple, install deities, and train his men to the Brahminical standards that have been found in our ISKCON temples. And he particularly wanted him to bring his men up to the standard of worship that was being done by the devotees in Melbourne. So, there were other installations that Prabhupada did when I was with it. Some deities were installed in Detroit as well. I'm just trying to think where else. Of course, he opened the Hyderabad temple as well on Janmashtami of 1976. That was in August. And the night before, Prabhupada had inspected the deities. Now, they already had Radha and Mohan. They were 6 feet tall. They're really big deities. And so they had gotten Gauratai, and they were to be installed, and then they also got Jagannath deities,